Pastor Terrell, how are you? Happy Dr. Martin Luther King Day.
Good morning. I am doing well. Yes, happy MLK Day.
So tell us, preacher, this is a special day for you with Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm sure you preached yesterday. Tell us what you talked about.
Oh, okay. Well, for this month, we have been in a series entitled um, "Your Table is Ready." For every believer, there is a place, a seat of authority, and I believe that God is going to open up doors of opportunity this year for us to walk into what we have been called to. And so yesterday's message was about the prepared table. Ephesians chapter 2 says that we are his workmanship, created to do good works, which he has before. I'm messing it up. Ephesians chapter 2, 1 through 10, where he says they have been preordained. And so it's just this idea that God has preordained something for us to do. And when we step into our purpose, we're stepping into God's plan. It's not that we're coming up with it, right? It's that we're stepping into the plan that he has already predestined us to do. And so when that door of opportunity comes, um, we can't allow fear or inexperience or the doubt of others to cause us to say no to what God is calling us to say yes to. Um,
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure the church really enjoyed that message. So talk to us about Dr. Martin Luther King and what does he mean to you?
um, yeah, I think as I reflect on that, I think that's to, I think it is a direct correlation. Um, you know, he is celebrated um, today in a way that he was not celebrated while he was doing the work, and the willingness to sacrifice for what he felt called to. And I think, as we've seen documentaries and movies about his life, um, we kind of have this overview story of this Baptist preacher who, he realized this call to go beyond the church and to really speak this message of reconciliation and empowerment. But there were people even in the church who were against his message, that thought it was too radical. There's a church here in Chicago that the city really halted the construction of the church building because that pastor allowed Dr. Martin Luther King to come and preach. And so the willingness to be misunderstood, the willingness to pursue the call of God, um, and the effect that it will have generations after we're gone if the Lord delays his coming. But to know that, like, I've done what God has called me to do, I think for me is the inspiring thing of his life. You know, before his death, he was talking about economic empowerment, and how it has to be more. Okay, I'm gonna say this quickly because the message was sort of taken as if it was only about kumbaya, everybody getting along, and there was so much more depth to some of the things that he was pushing for, that he was advocating for, and some of the people who would have criticized him in his day are now trying to celebrate and co-opt the day in 2024. But I think just his willingness to step out, to be misunderstood, and to sacrifice for what he believed in, uh, even if it is met with opposition and not immediate rewards. I think very often we are timid about doing what God has called us to do if we don't see how it's going to work out. How many paid? What's going to be the benefit, right? But to be willing to sacrifice it all for your yes, for your why. for me, I think is what I reflect on and what I even have to question myself with as we're on this journey.
That was really good, Pastor Terrell. So I'm putting you on the spot this morning. So I was telling everyone earlier, I remember even years past when you would open up social media, you had timelines of talking about Dr. King. We love Dr. King. You've seen videos. I opened timeline this morning and I didn't see anything. So what do you think is happening? Do you think people are forgetting?
I think that could be it. I want to say, I don't know if it was last year, maybe a couple of years ago, um, there was this large debate because, especially with, you know, the president before this current administration and all the things that were happening, and there were people who were adamantly uh, against minority advancement in any other setting, and then they were using Dr. King's words, right, and celebrating him when, in a sense, they didn't stand for his principles. And I do think that there are people who are forgetting. I do think that we're in a time where we are questioning a lot of things, and I think that that confusion may have led to some silence. I was a part of organizations, and Dr. King Day was always about a day of service, right? And many nonprofit organizations would do special service events on this day to commemorate. And unfortunately, I think that as new generations are questioning some of the narratives that have been created about history, this confusion is causing us to lose sight, right, of the history. And I don't know. That's just sort of my opinion. Maybe that's led to that, but I do think it's a very interesting time. Um, and I've seen that shift as well. Absolutely.
Thank you, Pastor Terrell. And the reason why I'm pushing you like this, because I really want to use some of this clip um, to create a podcast with this conversation that we're having right now, because I think it's important um, to for us to continue to remember Dr. Martin Luther King and the struggle and the march. I think it's important that we keep our children um, with Dr. Martin Luther King and everyone that marched with him. They need to remember why the march took place. And I think, like you said, prior to this administration, there was a lot of things that were said to diminish what Dr. Martin Luther King and people like himself did for the African American community and for people of color. And I think it was a systematic thing that they were doing in order to get the votes. So what do you think about that? What do you think we as a community, as a society, what do you think we should do at this moment?
Um, I almost don't want to bring this up, but we don't be honest. And I think that we have to, not just with Dr. King, but with others and with other movements, we have to be able to wrestle with truth, but then still be able to hold on and honor principle. Because there was also, I believe, a movement to, once again, as we're going back and reinvestigating history, there were some, I believe, that tried to use personal scandal in order to dilute the movement and the impact that Dr. King made. And once again, not just with Dr. King, but I think that we have to be able to really wrestle with, because I've heard people say things, right? I've heard social media talk about, well, you don't know about this side of Dr. King. And all of those conversations begin to bring into question, or it's like difficult for some to celebrate. And I think that we have to be sober minded in order to be able to maturely deal with the facts of history and not allow that to dilute the impact and the influence that Dr. King had. Last thing I'll say quickly is that we also have had a questioning of institutions. This is something that we've seen generationally, and I don't think that we have properly dealt with it. Many people are questioning institutions. Some of that people not coming to church as much, don't necessarily have anything to do with the gospel. Some of it is we are questioning institutions, we are questioning history, and we have such a gap in our generations that I just thought about the fact that there are people who live on streets in America, Martin Luther King Drive, that don't understand the significance of why that street was named that and the significance that he made. And so I think that we really have to pass on the legacy to the next generation. And when they have questions, being able to honestly answer those questions. Dr. King may have been a flawed human being like every human being who has ever walked the earth except Jesus Christ. But that does not take away for the impact of that movement. And we've got to be able to preserve that and to tell that and to use that to inspire the next generation. That while everybody is questioning institutions, the church, the government, etc., that God has called all of us to do something. I'll end it with scripture, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. I think the confusion has caused many people to turn off their light, and we got to be intentional about combating that.